Hello and welcome back to Euro Truck Soliloquy. I am Annemie. I had a bit of a week off last week, so sorry for the lack of scheduled programming. Instead, we had a week of Final Fantasy XII, which is good because Final Fantasy XII is really good. But I was in Italy for the week, as it turned out, on holiday to Naples and the Amalfi Coast, and I'm not going to bore you with the details of it, but it was very wet, lots of rain. But, you know, that's what you go to the Med for, isn't it? Rain! So yes, I am back here. For those of you who don't know, Euro Truck Soliloquy is the weekly show where I talk about the week's news, generally gaming news, whilst playing Euro Truck Simulator badly. Not really caring too much about how I do in the game, not obeying the laws so much, just kind of getting through it and having it for some form of visual interest whilst I talk. And also to, you know, keep my hands busy for the time, because I like doing things while I talk. Not in that way. So okay, I've been keeping up a little bit with the news in gaming whilst I've been in Naples. Been a little bit tricky as Wi-Fi wasn't 100%, but I did hear something about Kingdom Come Deliverance. This is a role-playing game. It's come out to some rather mixed reception as far as I can see. Not sure if I'm gonna pick it up or not. Probably not. I mean, I enjoy RPGs, but there's nothing about it which is making me feel like I have to play it. And Robert Purchase of Eurogamer wrote a review about this, and this review has gotten some attention, shall we say. He said that Kingdom Come Deliverance had a big problem, that there were no people of colour in the game beyond people from the Cuman tribe, which were a Turkic people from the Eurasian steppe. The question for Robert was, should there be? The game's developers say they've done years of research and found no conclusive proof there should be. But according to Robert Purchase, a historian he spoke to thinks somewhat differently. This historian said, open quotes, "We know of African kings in Constantinople on pilgrimage to Spain. We know of black Moors in Spain. We know of extensive travel of Jews from the courts of Cordoba and Damascus. We also know of black people in large cities in Germany." The historian... this was a quote from the historian Sean Miller. So, yeah, there was supposedly a decent number of black people in Europe. I mean, anyone who's got a vague grip of European history is aware that Spain, for instance, was a very Moorish and Islamic country for quite some time. And he says, Sean Miller continues to say, "You just can't know if nobody got sick and stayed a longer time. What if a group of black Africans came through and stayed at an inn and somebody got pregnant? Even one night is enough for a pregnancy." Robert Purchase continues then on to say, "It's not conclusive proof, but readily available doubt to undermine Warhorse, being the developer of Kingdom Come Deliverance, interpretation. What muddies the water further is whose interpretation it overridingly is." So, the creative director and writer of this game, along with Warhorse's co-founder, Daniel Vavra, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, he's been a vocal supporter of Gamergate, and was involved in antagonistic exchanges on Twitter, but more recently, he wore the same t-shirt every day at Gamescom 2017. This was a t-shirt depicting an album cover by the band Burzum, and Burzum is the work of one individual, Vark Vikernes, who was supposedly a convicted murderer and outspoken voice on racial purity and supremacy, even identifying as a Nazi for a while. So, whilst generally that would be irrelevant, right? Who cares what music somebody likes, but wearing the same t-shirt every day for a week either means that you've forgotten to pack enough t-shirts for your trip, you don't have more than one t-shirt, or you're trying to make a point. Some sort of show of solidarity. And it's... which way am I supposed to... this way. Cool. And it has to... seeing as we know that one of the developers and co-founder of the company likes this group and likes them enough to look past the Nazism and white supremacy, if that is something that they even need to look past, it does act as a lens for potential motives. Right? You can overlook, and we actually might talk about this later, you can overlook some issues to do with if there are bits in Civilization, for instance, that didn't seem particular, that seemed a little bit regressive, say. You could overlook that a little bit because Civ's designers for Axis, I hope I've not got that horribly wrong and confused with someone else, but Civ's designers have been shown to be generally progressive-minded people in the past. Which means that you can more easily attribute that to an oversight or a miscalculation or something along those lines rather than malicious intent. Or a selective reading of history, for instance. But this seems like there might be a little bit more to it, but that's not the most interesting thing about this for me. The interesting thing about this for me has been the internet's reaction to it, which has been incredibly negative and very much along the lines of, why did Robert Purchase write this? He shouldn't have written this, he should have just concentrated on the game. And these people seem to ignore the fact that all art, and games are art, all art is somewhat political. If you don't see it as political, that's just because you agree with the politics. Every single piece of artwork makes a political statement, even if they don't want to. And I feel like it's not unfair to point it out when you see it. If something is taking you... I mean, you shouldn't go out of your way looking for it, right? But the way that I read the article, it was that Robert Purchase, he noticed that it was very white, and then tried to find out why. It wasn't... From my reading of it, I might be wrong. From my reading of it, he wasn't trying to take the game apart because of the developer. If I'm wrong, please tell me. And if I am wrong, then we should absolutely criticize... Oh, whoops. Then this piece has possibly a bit more to criticize there. But the thing about this that I find the most tragic is that the people, a lot of the people who are against this game are the same people who are generally pro-freedom of speech and everything else, and they don't want the artistic integrity of a game to be ruined by people who think that Tracer should stand in a slightly different way to be more true to her character. Let's drop this off. I am in a hurry now. Let's do that. Satisfactory. I think I did set a waypoint on my map to repair my truck, but I kind of forgot to go there. So, whoops. Okay, what? Long distance. Why not? So, what should we do next? Freight market. Yeah, I've still not got the Italian expansion. Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, I've not been playing Euro Truck Simulator as much in my downtime. I still enjoy it for this, but I've got other downtime games to play, which I might talk a little bit about later as well. But okay, we've got a destination on our map. But yeah, these are the people who say they decry censorious attitudes in other sectors, seemingly making free speech arguments about issues that have very little to do with free speech, ironically. And yet, here they are saying that this Eurogamer writer shouldn't have given his opinion on something that he felt was a little bit off. And I do feel like we need to be a bit more, because it's easy to do, right? I mean, I don't think that these people are intentionally being hypocritical. We're all hypocritical to larger and smaller extents, but it's something that we really need to be aware of in our own human, really our own human flaws, right? Our flawed humanity, that's more what I want to say. And we need to be very careful that we're not arguing for completely opposed things at separate times. You can agree or disagree about whether the representation that Kingdom Come Deliverance gives is accurate. Reasonable people can argue about how many people of colour you would see in Europe. But what you shouldn't do is tell people, no, you shouldn't take this opposing view to me and write it in a review. It seems to be a complete misunderstanding of what criticism actually is. It's not objective. There are some things you might be able to objectively talk about, like frame rate, engines, right? But most of it, it's all about perception. And that's okay. There are some people whose perceptions you'll agree with, some people whom you'll disagree with, and you won't agree with everyone all of the time, and that's also gotta be okay. So let's argue about the actual thing, about whether or not Kingdom Come Deliverance's portrayals are good or not. And let's... am I gonna get damaged here? Come on, let me through! And let's not just try and say you shouldn't have this opinion. So on the point of Firaxis, the new Civilization expansion came out. I'm probably going to get this at some point. I've not been playing Civ 6 as much as I used to play Civ 5, but I did still really quite enjoy it. I know it wasn't some people's thing, but I thought it was really good. But the new expansion added some new hidden traits for leaders. So for those of you who don't know... Oh, am I not actually damaged? Well then, I thought I was. For those of you who don't know, generally in Civ, if you're playing pretty much any sort of game, you'll be playing against AI opponents, possibly with some human opponents as well. And the AI opponents have their own personalities. Some of them are predetermined because of who they are. So, for instance, I believe Victoria likes to be quite imperious. She likes conquering things. But they also have hidden traits, which are more randomly determined. And the new expansion, Rise and Fall, added two more, or added more than two more, but added a couple of these hidden traits which people have been talking about a little bit. They are a pair called Flirtatious and Curmudgeonly. Flirtatious leaders will have a higher opinion of leaders of the opposite gender as them, and have a lower opinion of those of the same gender, and vice versa. Curmudgeonly leaders will prefer people of the same gender and dislike people of opposing genders. Tractors, yes! How do I actually get to the tractors? In front of me. So, that... you might be able to see the problem with that already. And that is that flirtation is depicted as heterosexual flirtation, which, yes, is statistically, through history, the most common example of this. And some leaders are more flirtatious than others. I believe that Cleopatra, I think, is quite flirtatious. I might be confusing that with Civ. I think Civ 6 had Cleopatra, maybe. But you also have Alexander the Great being flirtatious. And Alexander the Great was... that was very close. Come on, let me through. Alexander the Great was a very notable queer historical figure. He was known to have taken male lovers. I don't know if he was exclusively gay. That was always how I thought of him, but that's also how lots of people think of Freddie Mercury, and we know that that is wrong. But yes, his flirtation definitely extended to people of the same gender as him. And so people have been complaining about this, and Firaxis have said that they are listening to fan feedback and are looking to change this in an upcoming update. And I know what a lot of you will be thinking, that we've heard these sorts of excuses before. We've heard them from Bungie, we've heard them from EA, we've heard them from a whole load of consumer unfriendly corporations, or excuses trying to excuse consumer unfriendly practices. But this is where Firaxis actually gets to spend its street cred. And this is a quality which seems to be rather underappreciated by AAA publishers, that if you've got a history of listening to the community, of being somewhat progressive, which way? This way, the line's not very clear. I'm going to go this way. If you've got a history of being somewhat progressive, people will cut you some slack when you seem to be not very progressive. They will attribute it more to mistake or oversight than to malice or political statement. Right? I mean, of course, putting in queer flirtations in Civ would be a political statement, but it wouldn't be one which runs contrary to previous outputs in the Civilization series, which I think is more what I was getting at, because of course, as we said earlier, everything's political. So yes, they say they're going to do something about it, and that makes me happy. I particularly like the fact that in the past, Civ has made quite a large effort to include female leaders. Sometimes they're even significantly lesser known female leaders, but trying to keep some amount of gender parity amongst the leaders of the countries, which unfortunately for England means that we always end up with Elizabeth or Victoria. Means we get a little bit less variety, but it's a price I'm willing to pay. And also that they do try very hard to think about lesser known civilizations. So I'm thinking of things like Haile Selassie's Ethiopia. I'm thinking of Congo. I'm thinking of Indonesia. Right? These are great civilizations, but civilizations that we don't tend to actually, at least not in Great Britain, where I grew up and learned history, civilizations that we don't tend to learn much about. We tend to be quite Eurocentric. If we go away from Europe, we might have a look at the Aztecs for a little bit, because they're exciting, and, you know, Europe was involved with them quite a lot. But don't really learn anything about Southeast Asia, aside from stuff that might have happened in the World Wars. Don't really learn much about Africa, not even the stuff that's in... I don't think we ever covered the African fronts in World War II. So I don't know what it's like in other countries. I mean, I know that America is notoriously insular with its education system, and I think the same thing is true in Australia. Australia seems relatively insular from people I've talked to there, but if your country already... if you already know about these people from education systems in your country, then you're doing better than we are. And that is a good thing. Because Civ is, for me, it's been one of the great educational games. It's taught me a lot about the different structures globally, right from its wonders. It's taught me about different civilizations. It's taught me that Gandhi really enjoys nuking people. Who knew? And I like to see Civ continuing on with a progressive stance. I'm not saying that we should have romancing in Civ. I feel like that would be a little bit... Although saying that, there was a whole thing about making alliances between countries for by marriage, right? But that's possibly starting to get a bit too far into Crusader Kings territory. I'm not entirely sure how you'd implement it within a Civ-like system. So I wouldn't be entirely averse to seeing political romances, but I'm not expecting to see regular queer expression within the Civilization series, and I'm fine with that. If we're there, fine, but it's not something I'm burning for. But let's try not to be... If you're going to have romantic things or sort of expressions of sexuality within Civilization, let's try to not have it be so laughable as having Alexander the Great exclusively flirting with women. So now we move on to Metal Gear Survive. This is, of course, the first game that Konami has released in the post-Kojima era. We've talked about it before. I thought it's a little bit weird for the first, this game to completely abandon the mechanics of all previous Metal Gear games, to just completely ignore the stealth section and turn it into a survival game. And it's come out to somewhat mixed reviews. Again, this is not a game I'm burning to get. It's fine, cool. It's a survival game. Those have never hugely grabbed me. I didn't even really like the hunger meters in Minecraft much as I loved the rest of the game. But this has... Metal Gear Survive has spawned a little bit more controversy, rather than just being a strange choice. It has microtransactions. This is not a surprise. Metal Gear Solid 5 had microtransactions, and it didn't improve the game. But it's the implementation of this which seems a little bit weird. And that is that you apparently only have one character slot, which is possibly not unreasonable. It doesn't seem like the sort of game where you'd be wanting multiple save files, unless, of course, you're playing it with somebody else, or somebody else in your family is playing it, or something like that. There might be multiple reasons why you'd want multiple save files. I'm not sure how it interacts with profiles, and whether you can set up a different profile in order to have more save slots, but regardless. But you can get more. You can get more character slots, which is good. How do you get these? Do you get them from getting to a certain point in the game? Do you purchase them with the money you earn in game? No, you naive fool. You get them by paying microtransactions. Each new character slot costs you 1,000 of the currency that they use. I've forgotten what the initials are. They all run into one. So you need 1,000 of these coins, and you can buy, I believe, 1,150 for £8. So this is what, about £7, £7.50 for a new character slot. Now, this seems weird. In particular, this feels like you're essentially buying one instance of the game for your $60, and then you need to keep buying it if you want essentially you're buying more instances of the game. And that's really weird. That's really weird, and I really don't like that. There seems to have been somewhat of a backlash against this. I really don't think this is a harmless feature, even if most people will never use it. I mean, imagine if you're, say, reviewing a game, and you want screenshots, and you want to get maybe multiple different character models looking at things, or you want to try something a little bit different but not erase your old save file. This could somewhat be interpreted as a reviewer tax. Ooh, did not notice that car. And that is not healthy. I mean, I assume that it's fairly common knowledge that reviewers tend to have multiple saves at different points of the game, if at all possible, in order to try and get as many screenshots as possible, as easily as possible, or video clips and so on. And this just feels very anti this, and also potentially anti-family play if Steam Family doesn't get around this somehow. I don't know. It would be interesting to find out, and I wish that I'd looked this up before starting recording, because it is a genuinely interesting question. But something that was a bit happier that came out of Metal Gear Survive this week is that eagle-eyed players spotted that at some point you see a roster of missing soldiers. And these missing soldiers, their initials actually read off KJP forever. Which, to most of us interpreting it, seems to be Kojima KJ Productions. Which seems like a really rather nice touch that the developers put in there under the watchful eye of Konami, the great taskmaster, to still say, hey Hideo, we miss you. We wish that you were here making games with us again. We wish that Konami weren't such colossal assholes. But unfortunately, Kojima is not still with Konami, and we all have to live with that. And Metal Gear Solid is over. Okay. So, as many of you might know, I certainly know, Final Fantasy 15 is coming to PC soon. I believe it's coming on the 6th of March, I want to say. But it's not too far in the future, and I'm very excited for this. I really enjoy the Final Fantasy series, as many of you will know, particularly those of you who have watched my videos last week playing Final Fantasy 12. I've played every mainline Final Fantasy game except for Final Fantasy 11. I've even played Final Fantasy 14 after it got fixed, and I enjoy them a great deal. I even enjoyed Final Fantasy 13, quite frankly, even though I see a lot of flaws in it. And many of you will also have heard that previously Final Fantasy did a weird crossover with Ubisoft, and they had an Assassin's festival within the Final Fantasy 15 world. I don't think that there was anything Final Fantasy in any Assassin's Creed games. I don't think. Maybe wrong on that, but I don't remember that. And that, to me, it felt a bit weird. So there's nothing wrong with Easter eggs, but this feels a bit bigger than an Easter egg. And Final Fantasy, for me, has always been about the story. Final Fantasy X was my first Final Fantasy, and I legitimately felt that story within my heart. I cried at the end of it. When the big twist reveal happened, I felt shock. And other Final Fantasies have done similar things for me. I'm thinking of, say, Dagger's dramatic haircut in Final Fantasy IX. Or, again, in Final Fantasy IX, the bit on the... is it the Invincible Garland's ship? When Zidane is being supported by all his friends. I felt for Terra and the Espers in Final Fantasy VI. There's so much to the story which really speaks to me, and it is an immersive world. It's not... I get why a lot of people don't necessarily feel that way themselves about Final Fantasy, given that it is very much... it is more on the film school of storytelling than the role-playing game school of storytelling. You're not affecting the world by your actions, you are running along train tracks. You're on story train tracks, right? But it is still immersive in its own way. You feel for the characters, they tend to be very strongly characterized. And I feel like just throwing in assassins, it breaks out a little bit, particularly such a striking reference to a very different video game franchise. If there were references going into Chrono Trigger, be cool with that. If we had references to Tales games, that would be fine. You could potentially imagine that they might exist, they could potentially exist in the same world. Not some... you don't get that with Final Fantasy, which is set in typically some sort of sci-fi fantasy setting, usually both at the same time, versus Assassin's Creed, which is a much more of a historic setting, even with the sci-fi elements. Now, I could see a crossover the other way working quite well, actually. An Assassin's Creed DLC, set of DLC missions essentially set inside a Final Fantasy world. Right, you get a lot of... well, in the... was Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag? You had Abstergo just making VR video games, right? Why not have one of those video games just be an exploration of Midgar, where you're out to kill Rufus Shinra or something like that? That would be great, and it would fit within the lore of the world. But this is old news, right? Why am I talking about this now? Well, it's because with the PC release of Final Fantasy 15, another crossover has been announced, and this is a crossover between Final Fantasy 15 and Half-Life. So you can wear Gordon Freeman's glasses in Final Fantasy 15. You can wear his... I've forgotten what the suit is even called, but his, big energy suit thing. You can equip your characters with those. And without having seen it, I can't pass definitive comment, but it seems to run up against the same issues. I can't see how this can be done in a way that isn't immersion breaking. Now, this doesn't seem to be a full-on DLC like the Assassin's Creed. I think that was a free DLC anyway, but it doesn't seem to be a DLC like the Assassin's Creed crossover was, where you explore an Assassin's festival. This seems to be much more cosmetic items, which makes me think that these are just going to sit forgotten at the bottom of your equipment box somewhere and is never going to be used, because why would you want someone running around a Final Fantasy world looking like Gordon Freeman for a serious playthrough of the game? You might want to do it for a lark, more power to you, but... and if you actually find it fine, I mean, the glasses themselves could be fine, right? They're glasses. It's the suit which seems a bit more immersion breaking. If that doesn't break your immersion, then good for you, you're a better person than I am, but seeing the bright orange suiting cutscenes, it really doesn't feel good. And of course, in terms of Valve, you do start wondering again, when is Half-Life 3 coming? The answer to that, of course, is never, but seeing Half-Life promotions in other media inevitably raises that question. And that shouldn't be a question which Valve want people to be asking. You don't want people thinking, where is this game which you promised us 10 years ago? Where is it? We see hints of it in other franchises. Why can't you guys do something with this? But then the workings of Valve have always been somewhat peculiar, shall we say. So I think that's it for the news I wanted to talk about. There's probably been more news happening, but I've not been able to keep up with Twitter quite as much as I would like to. Going and visiting limoncello making distilleries and the buried city of Pompeii will do that to you. But I have been playing a few things while I've been in Italy. Mostly just kind of small little things. I've been playing a couple of games this week, I think. The first one is an interesting little card game, which I tried doing a video for last week, but I wasn't happy with it. I might try and do it again at some later point. But it's a little card game called Slay the Spire. It's a roguelite card game where you essentially have a character, and you go through different levels of a dungeon fighting randomized encounters. And the way it does it is really quite satisfying. It's really quite strategic, because it's all against the computer. I don't think there's no multiplayer in the game at present, and it's in early access, so they might have plans to add it. I would be surprised if they didn't, because, quite frankly, card games are almost made for multiplayer. That's where they started off life, right? Magic the Gathering, Netrunner. See, I played Android Netrunner, and I knew that the original game was one half of that, and I just got the wrong half. But it does things really quite interesting. So a lot of the rooms that you might go into, you know in advance roughly what they're going to contain. So you know that they might be a treasure room, or they might be a rest spot, or they might be an enemy encounter. There are some rooms which you don't necessarily know what's going to happen, then it gets a bit more random with some extra surprises thrown in, but you can actually plot your course through depending on how much health you've got left, what your deck composition is like, and after each fight you might get some new cards, you might get some potions you can use, and you continue on that way. And another interesting thing about it is that it gives you a lot of information. So on your turn, you will know whether the enemy is planning to attack you. And if they are planning to attack you, you will know precisely how much damage they are going to deal. Or you might know they're going to block, or they might put some status effects on, and all of that is visible. Which makes it very much a game of strategy. Oh. Whoops. That was strange. Oh well, at least my trailer's not damaged. But it means you can plan things out a lot better, and it makes it a very satisfying experience to go through. It also doesn't feel like you're just getting unfairly dealt with. Right? You might spend a lot of your energy of the turn, because you only have so many cards you can play each turn. You might spend some of that blocking, and then the enemy turns out not to attack. And if that happens frequently enough, you might really and reasonably start getting frustrated with the game, but that's not going to happen. The only frustration that occurs is if you find out that all of your enemies are planning to attack you, you've not happened to draw any block cards this turn, so you're just gonna die. But then that's really your own fault for your own deck composition, and I like that. It's a pretty short game. You can just do like a couple of rooms, which take maybe 5-10 minutes at most, which makes it really good as just a little filler game, which worked out really well for me in Italy. If I was sitting around for, I don't know, half an hour whilst waiting for dinner time at the place where I was staying, I could just open up Slay the Spire, play a few games, and yeah, it's all good. So the other game I've been playing is Starpoint Gemini Warlords. This is a space 4X game. So 4X being exploration, exploitation, and other things to do with fighting and building something. I never know what 4X stands for, but essentially it's a space game. You go around, you do jobs for people, which might be shooting down other ships, or it might be scavenging for materials, or instead of that, you might just decide to buy some commodities at one area, fly to another area, and sell them for a higher price. And you can expand your own influence, and there's kind of limited strategy, real-time strategy elements going on there. It's very much a game where I've not made up my mind yet. I'm probably going to do a video on it when I do. But it's feeling empty at the moment, which is a shame. It's a thing which can always happen with space, but it feels like... So, let me give an example. When you unlock the ability to do research, research is... It's not done by anything like a gradual accumulation of research points, which you might see in other games. It's very much just stuff that you pay for using your resources, which you might otherwise use for building ships, or for building resource manufacturing areas, or upgrading your space station or something like that. It's all using the same resources, so it feels more like just buying something than researching something. And as a good game should, when you first... Ooh, let's see if I can get through here without damaging myself. There we go. Like good games should, in the tutorial, it recommends what sort of things would be good to research early on. But the problem is that the first thing that it says you should research is quite an expensive thing to research, meaning that you're... Or at least that I felt like that should be my first thing that I get, despite the fact that, looking back on the options, I feel like there might have been other things which I should have got before that, like increasing my ability to produce resources, which is typically what I tend to go for in these things, because I like exponential growth. And this has been taking me quite a lot of grinding to get up to this point, which is not something you want to do with a player early on. It also just... There's a lot of go here, do this. And the fast travel system doesn't make it feel like a cohesive world. So the fast travel system, you essentially have something called a T-drive, which allows you to warp from place to place, and in particular, and this will generally cost you stuff, I believe, but it tells you that T-drive warping is free to main mission markers. Which, again, just breaks some immersion for me without even giving us a conceit of somebody maybe approving an extra walk or sending across some material to do the warp. It's just, yeah, it's free. Let's just do it. It feels very gamey. And something like this, it should be about exploration. You should be finding cool things. And space is just kind of empty. You find some anomalies, but you scan them and that's it. You might find some wreckages where you might send your scavenger robots out and they might get you some items which go in your inventory, but they sometimes have some funny descriptions, genuinely funny descriptions. But you get a lot of repeats with those, so it doesn't feel like you're doing much unique, and it's a game which I want to like. Space always seems like a wonderful setting for games, right? Are you actually going to come back in this lane? There we go. Yeah. Twonker. It's always such a great setting for games, but I don't remember playing a space game that I particularly enjoyed the setting of. I'm kind of lukewarm on Mass Effect, in all honesty, and No Man's Sky, it was fine. It was fine. But because a lot of games feel the need to give some idea of distance, oh, and that's another thing, you travel very slowly to your destination, so there can just be a lot of put it on autopilot, wait for a minute or two, you've arrived. That isn't fun. You want to minimize waiting for players, particularly in the early game where you want to hook them. You've also got a few missions which require you to have a ship of a particular quality before you can proceed. So again, it just puts this roadblock in front of you and says, grind. And I don't mind grinding. I enjoy grinding. I play lots of JRPGs, right? You don't generally play those if you don't enjoy the grind. But I don't like being told that I have to grind. I like grinding because I want to get the power not to pass some arbitrary checkpoint. But we'll see if it manages to change my mind. It's getting a little bit more expansive as I get through. But for me, I'm comparing it in my mind to, and not just because of the name, to Mountain Blade Warband, which gives you that feeling of size. It gives you a feeling of a world that you're exploring without necessarily having actually too much going on in it. I mean, the world of Mountain Blade, it doesn't feel like a world. But it's still satisfying to go across it, engage in battles, build up an army. And this currently doesn't. But as I said, I've not fully made up my mind on it. And I'm almost certain that there will be a video either probably on Friday or Monday, I would imagine. Oh no, Monday's Final Fantasy Day. So either on this Friday or next Friday. Forgetting my own schedule. So I think that's most of what I want to talk about this week. So if you have enjoyed this video, I would greatly appreciate it if you would give it a like on YouTube. If you want to see more like it, please subscribe to my channel. I do Let's Plays of Hitman, Final Fantasy XII, and Deus Ex. I also do impressions of games, and every week you'll get another one of these Euro Truck soliloquies, so please do check those out. If you want to add something to the conversation, feel free to comment. I will do my best to read as much as possible, and to include any interesting points, bits where I might have changed my mind, in future videos. So please do that, but above all, have a lovely rest of your day. Goodbye.